Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to spotlight some houseplants that thrive in medium or indirect sunlight. I feel like we spend so much time focusing on houseplants that either thrive in highlight or low light that we kind of forget that there are so many more houseplants that thrive in this in-between setting. And when I say indirect sunlight, I mean obviously, not quite highlight, not quite low light. This isn't quite in a windowsill. This isn't quite in a dark corner. We're perhaps working like 2 to 6, maybe 8 feet away from your windows in your home. And I think one of the best examples of a houseplant that thrives in this setting is none other than the classic Philodendron. Now this is a little bit more of a Instagram collectible one, if you will. This is a Philodendron squamiferum, which I absolutely love for not only just the incredible leaf shape that these leaves have, but this really interestingly unique petiole that this plant has. It's very fuzzy and red. It's really quite phenomenal. But pretty much every philodendron, or in fact aroid I would say, so the larger classification, the subfamily of plants, which includes philodendron, I would say pretty much all of these are going to thrive in this medium indirect light setting. So not only this Philodendron squamiferum that I have right here, but the myriad of other aroids that I have in the shelves behind me here. So this Anthurium veitchii, this Syngonium podophyllum albovariegatum, this Monstera adansonii, there's a Philodendron brantianum up here, and a Philodendron painted lady. I think these are both off the frame, but you get what I'm saying. If it's a Philodendron, if it's a Syngonium, if it's any of the above, Anthuriums, Monsteras, I feel very confident that it's going to thrive in this magic in-between setting of indirect sunlight. So these are plants that grow along the forest floor in most of their natural habitats. So this is kind of showing you that they are growing in a rather dappled light area with the trees above and the canopy kind of shading them down below, with just some of the sun rays kind of working their way down to the forest floor. So that kind of translates as these thriving in that indirect sunlight setting, not quite low light, not quite high light, as they're not being beaten with the sun, but they're not quite growing in a dark cave either. Not that I'm aware of any plants that grow in caves, because no sunlight. Maybe there's a couple. That's beyond the point. I think you guys get what I'm saying. So across the board, philodendron are generally pretty easy to grow. Of course, there are the outliers that are the ones that are the collector, scary, expensive philodendrons that are probably more suitable for a greenhouse setting or a botanical garden setting. However, these ones that are more applicable for our homes, let's say, including this Philodendron squamiferum and the other ones that I was talking about earlier, these are all going to be pretty lackadaisical in terms of care. So these are ones that I'm probably only watering like once every week or so. Maybe every 2 or 3 weeks I'll like throw them in the shower to clean up these leaves, because these larger leaves do tend to get pretty dusty, and I'm sure that some dust and doodads get stuck in these fuzzy petioles for this one in particular. But it's always good to keep your plants clean, especially since some other philodendrons get some little sugar deposits on their petioles, which get kind of sticky, and which is totally fine and not going to affect the health of the plant whatsoever. But in the home, it's not the most amazing thing to have the sticky sap falling on the ground or getting on your arms when you're reaching around your plants. Maybe this is just a me problem. Anyway, I do like to put my philodendrons in the shower every now and again to give them a good clean. I'm sure you can see I have this little contraption right here. This is called a moss pole, even though this one in particular I believe is made out of coconut coir or coconut husk. This is something that allows the plant to attach to it and climb up, and as it gets larger, these leaves get larger. You can see this one plant kind of has some smaller leaves going on. This other plant has some larger leaves. Don't really know the science behind that, but in theory, if I was to allow this to grow up the pole higher and higher, and this particular one allows you to put another one in to allow it to grow up even more higher, and you can grow it up to your ceiling if you would like. So this is just going to encourage these plants to have their leaves mature, which in nature, as they grow along the forest floor, specifically the climbing philodendrons, they are going to climb up the trees, and as they get closer and closer to the brighter sunlight, these leaves are going to get larger and larger. So that's just kind of how it works out, I guess. I have a trellis off camera next to me that you can't see, but I have, for example, my Philodendron red emerald climbing up all the way to the top, and as it gets closer to the top, it really starts to mature. The stem starts to get a little bit thicker, and the leaves get a little bit more definition, size, and shape. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of pros to growing your plants, specifically your aroids and philodendrons, on a moss pole setting or allowing them to climb or anything of that nature. So if you really do want to grow your aroids to their fullest potential, specifically climbing aroids, there are plenty of aroids that don't need a moss pole. I highly, highly recommend it. So let's move on to another one. I've been kind of yammering about this philodendron for who knows how long. So I have this lovely little guy right here. So this is a begonia. This is begonia erythrophila, if I'm being specific, but I would kind of lump pretty much, not all, but most begonias into this indirect medium light category. So this begonia I actually grow on my kitchen counter, which there is an LED kind of light strip that goes along my counter, just like under the cabinet. So I was having a hunch that that might be a good enough grow light situation for some of my houseplants, so I've been trying this one out there, and it seems to be really enjoying it. I had it before growing under one of my grow lights on the shelf here, but because this plant is so low lying, I wasn't really able to enjoy it in the way that I can enjoy some of the other ones while they're in the back, like this syngonium that I pointed out earlier, kind of has some more height to it, and you can really see it when it's in the back of the shelf. This guy was just kind of hiding back there. So now I have it front and center next to my sink every time I am rinsing off some dishes or washing my hands. I get to enjoy this guy. And not to mention that it makes it a lot easier to remember to water this plant when I have it right next to my sink. Not that it's the most needy plant when it comes to water. That's something I really appreciate about begonias, that they, at least for the most part, aren't like a fern. There are definitely some begonias that do need to be a little bit more taken care of. Rex begonias are the ones that are particularly coming to my mind. But a lot of other begonias are a little bit more drought tolerant, but they're going to tell you, at least this one very visually will kind of just like flop over and look like it needs a drink. I go ahead and squirt it with the sink, and then it pops back up good as new the next day. This one I got from the Potted Elephant, one of my favorite online houseplant stores, and they sent this one to me I think probably about a year ago, no more than a year and a half ago, and it was really small when they sent it to me, and you can kind of see if I turn this plant around how this plant has kind of creeped along the edge of the planter and is just kind of really getting some nice character to it. I really appreciate this plant, and I always see a lot of begonias that look like this, if not this exact one, in like the windows of like dry cleaners or a lot of different places around Philadelphia that I feel like always like laundromats and dry cleaners always have like plants in their windows, and this is one that I see pretty often, and they got some pretty good taste in plants, I will tell you, because this is really just a fantastic houseplant. I'm sure I haven't pointed it out yet, but one of my favorite things about this plant is if I turn it to the back, they have this really lovely shade of like wine red, like burgundy underneath. It's really fantastic, and it kind of shows on the new leaves as they grow, and you can see this new leaf right here. It kind of shows in it, but then once it gets more mature, it gets some more green to it. So this is such a fantastic houseplant. Begonias across the board are really, really great. I really enjoy growing begonias and trying to get more and more of them in my home because they really do have such a fantastic vibe, as they all have such a similar characteristic, but at the same time are completely different. The leaves always have a very similar like shape to them, but then the characteristics of the leaves are just widely different compared to like other plants that I grow in my home. Like you can always tell a philodendron is a philodendron, but some of these begonias, they get pretty funky and out there. But this is one I just had to talk about today. I've really been enjoying it. There are, my begonia collection is growing a little bit more than it used to, but this is still one that is going to probably be in my heart for a very, very long time. I really enjoy it. And let's move on to this guy right here, which is, I think, a pretty interesting choice for this category. So this is a Rhipsalis, and if you're looking at this upon first glance, you're probably thinking that looks like a cactus, or like a funkier cactus, because yes, it is a funkier cactus. It's got a lot of character. And this is definitely something that if you frequent houseplant stores that you would see growing in the succulent and cacti selection at your houseplant store, which would, if you use the context clues, make you believe that it's something that needs to be growing in a windowsill, a bright windowsill, or a very, very bright setting, or directly under a grow light, any of those options that you would consider to be high or bright light. Rhipsalis across the board, not just this one. This one is a Rhipsalis pilocarpa, if I didn't already mention. Rhipsalis across the board are really, really excellent contenders for more succulent cacti plants that will thrive in this in-between setting in the home. So these are, while they are cacti, they are jungle cacti, which means they grow in the jungle and the rainforest, and how that kind of translates similar to how we were talking about the philodendrons and the way that they grow in the rainforest, that they're kind of subject to medium, lower light situations. If you were to give your Rhipsalis a little too much low light, I don't see it dying on you. I kind of just see it getting a little bit thinner. These leaf thingies, sticks, are already pretty thin as is, so I just see them getting a little bit thinner if you were to grow it in too low light, but I don't see it having a harsh demise unless you overwater it. So the watering on this plant is very, very, very easy. I grow this one up on my picture ledge in my bedroom, which means that it's high up, and I don't think about watering it like ever. I probably give this like a really good watering, like once every month, maybe like every 5 or 6 weeks, but I give it a little splish splash from the watering can probably every like 10 days or so, but I do make sure to give it a good watering every now and again, but I'm always worried, if I'm being honest, because the soil is so porous that if I water it too much, the water's just gonna come pouring out. I have it in this tray that is too small for its own good, so that is a me problem that I'm dealing with. I probably could water this plant a little bit more thoroughly, a little bit more often. However, it looks fine. It looks totally fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It doesn't look shriveled at all. I did not water it recently, I can tell you that much, but it looks fantastic. It's always growing little puffs and sticks and things here and there. And this is just one example of Rhipsalis. There are so many others that have such interesting appearances. There are some that do have thicker leaf sticks thingies. I need to figure out the name. It's like platyclades or something. I don't know, but I don't know. We're gonna call them leaf sticks right now. But the ones that have thicker leaf sticks, you're going to want to probably keep a little closer to the window. Once again, does not have to be growing in the window by any means, but you know, as we're saying, the lower light you give something, the more you're risking the leaves not growing to their fullest potential. So this is something that I personally am growing probably about 8 to 10 feet away from my windows, but I think it would be totally fine, like up to like 4 feet away from the windows, but if you do put them inside the windows, that's when they can start to get a little bit of that like sun damage, and these will get kind of black and like brownish in comparison to like some other plants that sun stress very beautifully, like the pseudo Rhipsalis plant or the mistletoe cactus that gets a really lovely red hue when it's subject to highlight. This one gets brown and ugly. So keep that in mind. Super easy plant. So many excellent Rhipsalis out there. Give them a go. I'm sure you're going to see them if you are perusing your succulent and cacti selection. And whenever I would buy them, back when I was a buyer at the houseplant store, if I was buying them in like a larger hanging basket, they would always cost so much money. But when I would get them in little assortments of like succulent and cacti trays, they would always just cost the same as everything else, which was dirt cheap. So I would particularly keep an eye out in the smaller sections of your store, but if you are into finding just a full waterfall of these leaf sticks, by all means, shell out the money. They're excellent houseplants. So I have 2 more, I believe I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk about this one first. This is a really wild guy right here. So this is my Peperomia scandens variegata, which they often call the false philodendron, or the philodendron peperomia, because it's got this very similar leaf shape to the philodendron scandens or philodendron hederaceum. There's a bunch of different names for it. Just your classic heartleaf philodendron. Of course, this one has some white variegation on it. I do grow the plain green one in my home as well. I just think this one's a little bit more of an interesting specimen. And I will admit, I moved into my apartment 6 months ago. I placed this thing down on my little TV stand next to my TV. I had not picked it up one time, and I don't think it's going to be able to go back in that setting, because these vines had like creeped their way all the way around the settings that it was in, and I did not realize how much of a monster this houseplant is. It has a little too much character for me to want to hang up. It's a little sparse, let's say, but it's still got a lot going on. So there are so many peperomias out there. There are definitely some peperomias that I would consider to be highlight houseplants. I believe in my bright light, harsh sunlight houseplant video I did maybe a month or 2 ago, I think I talked about Peperomia Hope as an option for brighter light houseplants, so that is absolutely one that's more brighter light, maybe Peperomia and Kana. Any of these more like thicker leaves that are much more succulent, or maybe the stems are much more succulent, these are really going to want some brighter light situations. However, this Peperomia scandens is one of those peperomias that has very, very thin leaves. You can't do my taco test on this Peperomia because the leaves are just so thin. So this is one that I found has really thrived in the interior settings of my home. So as I said, I've been growing this on my television stand, which is kind of just a jumbled mess of crates that I turned into a TV stand. So I kind of just like pushed it in there. It's definitely hidden, not receiving very much sunlight at all. And this thing has just been thriving. Of course, like I said, might have to find a new situation for it, but I'm gonna try to squeeze it back into where it was. The Peperomias, I think the worst thing you can do for them, specifically when you are in lower light situations, which I wouldn't really consider indirect medium light to be lower light situations, but with any houseplant, if they are not receiving enough sunlight, they might not be processing their water quick enough. So a peperomia is definitely a type of plant that is one to rot on you if you are a little heavy-handed with the watering, so I would be mindful there. This one I let get completely dry, even though I said I can't really do my taco test on it, which I would normally be like squeezing leaves up like a taco shell, and normally they won't budge. If they're well watered, this one completely budges because the leaves are extremely thin, but I will let it get completely dry. I can kind of feel and see in the plant that it'll be kind of more floppy and flaccid, and I will go ahead and water this plant and then it's good as new. But it is always best to err on underwatering with your peperomia and many other plants, but Peperomia particularly are going to not handle that overwatering well. I cannot stress that enough. So this guy in this little ceramic pot here has been thriving about probably 4 feet, maybe 6 feet away from my east-facing windows. However, it is completely shielded by so many other larger plants in the area. My Natal mahogany specifically is just a whole bushel of leaves that blocks a lot of the sunlight that heads over to the TV stand area. So really one that I have been surprised has been thriving in this situation. I would have thought beforehand that this is one that would thrive more in a brighter light setting, but since I moved to this apartment and I've been experimenting with growing both of my scandens in lower light situations, I've been very happy with how they're performing. So yeah, I am once again yammering about this plant. I guess that's kind of what my job is to do, but yeah. A very, not similar, but often mistaken to be peperomias because of their name alone, Pileas. So this is a Pilea grandifolia right here. So obviously this looks nothing like a peperomia, it doesn't read peperomia at all, but probably the main reason why we are often kind of combining Pileas is because of this little guy right here, the Pilea peperomioides. So this is kind of a two for today. So Pilea peperomioides is probably one of the most popular Pileas that's out there in the market. This was the it plant, no joke, in like 2016, 2017. This little guy right here will probably go for like $60 at the store. Nowadays you walk in and I think I bought this one for $2 at a little farm stand. So yeah, you can do the math there. But this is a very easy houseplant to grow. This is one that thrives in the indirect to medium sunlight area. This is something I also grow on my TV stand. I've only had this one in my home for probably like 2 months now, but it has doubled, if not tripled in size since I got it, and it looks fantastic. But the one I really wanted to talk about today is the Pilea grandifolia. So this is one I always say every time I am talking about it here on YouTube, that I love it mostly because it looks like an edible houseplant. It kind of reads like a mint plant or a basil plant or something that you might roll up in chiffonade and throw into your bruschetta, or give it a little spink or slap and put it in your mojito. So I grow this one in my kitchen, which once again is very indirect sunlight. It's probably about 10 feet away from my east-facing windows, where I have this particular one in my home growing on my little dining table situation. And I grow it there ironically because I think it looks, like I said, like an edible plant. So I just think it works, and it'd be funny if like one of my friends was like, oh, this will be great in my cocktail. Anyway, nobody's done that, and it's not poisonous, so nothing would happen if they did. But it's still not edible. It's non-toxic, but it's not edible, so I need to do some research on how that science works out. Anyway, I'm getting totally off topic. So obviously these thrive in indirect sunlight. There are so many types of pileas out there. I feel like I got this one from stevesleaves.com, but I will often in the terrarium section of any of the houseplant stores that I go to, or often in like the exotic angel selection of like the Costa Farms plants that you see when you're at the big box stores. There are always so many different types of pilea in them, which gets me very excited because I feel like most people probably walk into those stores and they're just like, oh, those are boring and they're gray and gross colors. But that's kind of what I like about Pilea, is that they got these really funky colors. And this is totally a horrible example of all of these Pileas I'm mentioning. Of course, I don't have any of these in my home to share with you guys. Of course, a quick Google search would probably answer any of the visual questions that you have. This one is so green and gorgeous and practically fake looking, but there are plenty of other Pilea out there that you're going to see if you're at your big box stores that have a little bit more shapeful leaves. I don't know how to describe it. They got more shape to them. They got many more fall dying leaf colors to them. So there are many Pilea with a lot of character, and they're just such incredible houseplants. So I highly recommend giving them a go. They're always very inexpensive, probably because they're not very popular, or maybe it's because they're so ridiculously easy to propagate. Even the Pilea peperomioides, as I mentioned now, is incredibly inexpensive, but these are just such wonderful houseplants. I don't think they get the attention that they deserve, but they really are plants that are going to 100% thrive in the medium light areas of your home. The Pilea peperomioides, I do my little taco test on because the leaves are so succulent and thick. Ones like this, however, I kind of can just tell when the leaves get kind of floppy or the stems get kind of floppy. Like I can tell I probably could water this guy. Today is probably the first day I could water because these stems are starting to get a little floppy, a little less life to them. But if I go maybe like 2 or 3 days more without watering this plant, these leaves will totally become just like total floppy, just a sad wilted mess, very similar to like a peace lily, but fortunately, you water it and it perks back up very quickly. I would just be mindful, as Pilea do prefer to stay more on the moist side. Not the Pilea peperomioides, that one likes to stay drier, but all these other Pilea that I'm talking about today, they do like to stay a little bit more moist. So if you do go a little too long without watering, let them wilt a little too much, you might get some of these lower leaves turn brown and fall off, and then it might just become a little bit more bare on the bottom over time. So just something to bear in mind there, but besides that, I think this is an excellent houseplant. It's not just gonna die on you if you forget about it. It's totally gonna survive. Handles overwatering well, handles drought to a point. It's great for a beginner. Just really an incredible houseplant that, like I said, just really deserves way more attention. So that's gonna do it for today's video, houseplants that thrive in bright or indirect sunlight. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I already did videos on plants that thrive in bright/harsh sunlight and plants that thrive in low light situations, so be sure to check those out if you haven't already. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.